Chris has asked me to speak about the book called Jeremiah.
Chris me je prosil, da bi spregovoril iz knjige po imenu Jeremija.
So we immediately have a problem.
Tako imamo problem.
Because I love the book of Jeremiah.
Jaz imam res rad Jeremijevo knjigo.
So I could go on many tangents.
Tako da bi lahko osvetlil mnogo detajlov.
And we could be here till next week.
In lahko bi bili tukaj do naslednjega tedna.
Here's the second problem.
Ampak tu imam pa drug problem.
Jeremiah is the longest book in the Bible.
Jeremija je najdaljša knjiga v Svetem
Now some of you are looking at me as if I've got that wrong.
Nekateri me gledate kot da se motim.
And you're thinking Psalms is the longest book in the Bible.
Pa si mislite, ne, psalmi so najdaljša knjiga v Svetem pismu.
But it isn't. Jeremiah is much longer than Psalms.
Pa vendar temu ni tako. Jeremija je veliko daljši od psalmov.
Just doesn't have as many chapters.
Jeremija pač nima toliko poglavij.
But it has about 8,000 more words.
Ima pa približno 8,000 besed več.
So if you read Jeremiah, you've read 5% of the Bible.
Torej, če preberete celo knjigo Jeremije, ste prebrali 5% celotnega Svetega pisma.
And it would be a good idea for you to read Jeremiah.
In dobra ideja bi bila, da preberete Jeremijo.
If you start now,
če začnete zdaj,
you will have finished by 11 p.m.
boste končali nekje do 11 zvečer.
So if you don't pause and you just start reading Jeremiah now, you'll have finished in 4 hours.
Torej, če začnete brati zdaj in brez premora berete, boste prebrali v približno 4 urah.
Or an easier way to do it, there are 52 chapters.
Ali pa lažji način je 52 poglavij.
And how many weeks are there in a year?
In koliko tednov imamo v letu?
52.
52.
Just read a chapter a week.
Lahko torej preberete eno poglavje na
And you'll
teden
be masters of Jeremiah.
in boste obvladali Jeremijevo knjigo.
So I do want to allow you to learn something tonight about this book.
Rad bi torej, da se v tem večeru nekaj naučite o tej knjigi.
What I don't want to do is delve into a verse or two
Nočem pa iti vrstico po vrstico
and teach it,
in to učiti.
because then you will just learn about 2 or 3 verses.
Namreč potem boste morda spoznali samo 2 ali 3 vrstice.
And you'll know very little about the wonderful man or his wonderful book.
Zelo malo pa boste izvedeli o tem čudovitem možu te čudovite knjige.
So is it okay if I do 3 things?
Je torej okej, če naredim 3 stvari.
Make some comments about the book,
Malo bom pokomentiral knjigo,
tell you the context of the book,
podaval bom kontekst te knjige
and then look at the structure of the book.
in potem bomo pogledali strukturo knjige.
And then we'll look at some verses,
In na to bomo pogledali nekaj vrstic.
and you're going to discuss them.
In vi boste razpravljali o teh vrsticah.
Oh,
O,
you don't look keen about that.
ne zgledate preveč navdušeni nad tem.
But we'll try and do it. We'll divide you into 3, and you can have a chat about 3 sections of Jeremiah.
Ampak to lahko naredimo. Razdelili se bomo v 3 skupine in predelali 3 odlomke iz Jeremije.
Is that okay?
Je to v redu?
Oh, smile at me if it's all right.
Nasmehnite se, prosim, če je to v redu.
So here's this book, Jeremiah, and it's about sin
To je torej Jeremijeva knjiga in je o
Judgment.
grehu, o sodbi
and renewal.
in o obnovi.
But I have to be fair,
Ampak da sem pošten,
it's about sin this much,
je o toliko greha,
judgment this much,
toliko sodbe
and renewal this much.
in toliko obnove.
It's not a happy read.
To ni veselo branje.
If you're after a feel-good beach book to take on holiday,
Če iščete lahko knjigo za na plažo, za na vaše počitnice,
don't take Jeremiah.
naj to ne bo Jeremija.
I told you I flew out of England.
Omenil sem že, da sem priletel iz Anglije.
Imagine this story.
Predstavljajte si tole zgodbo.
I boarded the plane.
Krcal sem se na letalo,
The doors were shut with me and many other people.
pred vrati sem bil jaz in mnogo drugih ljudi.
We took off,
Vzleteli smo
and the captain spoke through the intercom.
in pilot je spregovoril.
And the captain says this:
Rekel je tole:
"Hey everyone, welcome on board the flight.
Hej vsi, dobrodošli na letu.
I want to let you know I never wanted to be the captain of this flight,
Rad bi vas obvestil, da nikoli nisem želel biti pilot.
but the airline made me do it.
na tem letu, ampak letalska družba me je prisilila.
I can let you know that this flight is going to crash.
Obvestil bi vas rad, da bo to letalo strmoglavilo.
And the plane is going to burn up.
In letalo bo zgorelo.
Many of you are going to die,
Mnogi izmed vas boste umrli,
but there will be a few survivors.
ampak nekaj vas bo preživelo.
Some of you may be thinking, can't we do anything to stop this happening?
Morda razmišljate, ali lahko kaj naredimo, da to zaustavimo oziroma preprečimo.
And the answer is no.
In odgovor je ne.
The airline have said it's got to happen.
Letalska družba je rekla, da se mora to zgoditi.
But the good news is,
Ampak dobra novica je,
you're going to crash in a place where there are people.
strmoglavili boste na mesto, kjer so ljudje.
But they will be your enemies.
Ampak ti ljudje bodo vaši sovražniki.
But if the few of you who survive
Ampak tista peščica izmed vas, ki bo preživela,
manage to live peaceably among your enemies,
če ta peščica lahko živi mirno med svojimi
then
sovražniki,
you will have some hope
boste imeli nekaj upanja,
of going back home.
da se vrnete domov.
Now, how would you like to be on a flight like that?
A bi hoteli biti na tem letalu?
Well, I've just explained to you the book of Jeremiah.
Ravno kar sem razložil Jeremijevo knjigo.
And the captain is Jeremiah,
Pilot je Jeremija
and the airline is God.
in letalska družba je Bog.
That's why Jeremiah is not a happy book.
Zato Jeremijeva knjiga ni srečna
But
knjiga.
nevertheless, it's quoted by Jesus,
Pa vendar na vse zadnje jo Jezus citira.
it's quoted by the apostles,
Apostoli jo citirajo.
and it forms the central theme of the book of Hebrews.
In je zasnova za osrednjo temo pisma Hebrejcem.
Whoever wrote Hebrews.
Kdorkoli jih je že napisal.
It features an angry God
Jeremijeva knjiga prikaže jeznega Boga
and a weeping prophet.
in preroka, ki joče.
Sometimes we think it features an angry prophet, but it doesn't, and this is crucial.
Včasih mislimo, da prikaže jeznega preroka, ampak ga ne, in to je ključnega pomena.
Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet
Jeremija je poimenovan jokajoči prerok.
because the message he's got to give
Namreč sporočilo, ki ga mora on podati,
makes him very sad.
ga res razžalosti.
And he wouldn't get his message across if he was the shouting prophet.
In če bi bil on ta prerok, ki kriči, njegovo sporočilo ne bi prišlo do poslušalcev.
And the book of Jeremiah is a biography,
Jeremijeva knjiga pa je tudi biografija,
but it's a mixed up biography.
ampak je malo zmedena
It's not
biografija.
in chronological order.
Ne gre po kronološkem redu.
You can't start at chapter 1 and find a baby Jeremiah
Ne boste začeli v prvem poglavju in našli dojenčka
and get to the
Jeremijo,
last chapter and find a dead Jeremiah
in potem prišli do zadnjega poglavja in našli mrtvega
and
Jeremijo.
assume that everything in between happens in order.
In ne morete pričakovati, da se vse vmes zgodi v vrstnem redu.
That's not the way it's structured.
Knjiga ni zasnovana na tak način.
But nevertheless, it is a biography and it is poetry.
Je pa biografija in je poezija.
Jeremiah is also the master of what's called object lessons.
Jeremija je tudi mojster objektivne lekcije.
Do you know what an object lesson is? It's where he uses something practical and physical
Objektivna lekcija je, ko uporablja nekaj praktičnega, nekaj fizičnega,
to explain something that God wants to say.
da bi ponazoril oziroma predstavil nekaj, kar želi Bog povedati.
And I wish we had time to look at some of the strange things he did.
In rad bi, da bi imeli čas, da bi pogledali nekaj čudnih stvari, ki jih je on
He
naredil.
took off his belt
Vzel je svoj pas
and buried it.
in ga je zakopal.
I mean, that's weird, right?
To je čudno, kaj ne?
Now I've teased that. You're going to have to read and find out what that's all about.
Zdaj sem vas malo spodbudil, da sami pogledate, o čem
He
govori
took a
zgodba.
pot and broke it.
Vzel je lonec in ga je razlomil.
And you're going to have to read to find out what that's all about.
In morali boste sami prebrati, da ugotovite, zakaj se gre.
And he himself was an object lesson.
Pa tudi on sam je bil lekcija predmeta.
Because God told him, you're not going to marry
Bog mu je povedal, ne boš se poročil
and you're not going to have children.
in ne boš imel otrok.
And that itself will say something to the people.
In že to samo po sebi bo ljudem nekaj sporočilo.
So I've just told you 3 strange things that's happened to
Torej,
Jeremiah.
ravno kar sem navedel 3 čudne stvari, ki so se zgodile Jeremiju.
And I hope that's intrigued you to dip into this book a bit, because it is fascinating.
In upam, da vas je to spodbudilo, da malo globje pogledate v knjigo,
Okay.
saj je fascinantno.
Here's some context about Jeremiah.
Tu imamo nekaj konteksta o Jeremiji.
Have any of you ever read the books of Kings? Wave at me if you have. I don't expect many of you to have.
Ne pričakujem, da mnogi izmed vas, ampak
First Kings and Second Kings in the Bible.
torej prva in druga knjiga kraljev.
Very interesting read.
Zelo zanimivo branje.
But if you want to know how to understand the context of Jeremiah, you just have to read 3 chapters from the book of Kings, right?
Če pa bi radi razumeli
Now,
kontekst
some of you
Jeremije,
need to make a note of this.
morate
Right?
prebrati 3
We haven't got
poglavja.
time to read these chapters, but I'm going to tell you where they are. Second Kings,
Morate prebrati 3 poglavja iz knjige kraljev. Sami boste morali pogledati.
Second Kings chapter 23
Druga kraljev,
Chapter
23.
24.
poglavje, 24. poglavje
and chapter 25.
in 25. poglavje. Se pravi, druga kraljev, 23-25.
If you read those 3 chapters,
Če preberete te 3 poglavja,
you'll see the whole context of Jeremiah.
boste videli celoten kontekst Jeremijeve knjige.
He lived around about 600 years before Christ,
Živel je približno 600 let pred Kristusom
and his ministry lasted 40 years.
in njegovo služenje je trajalo 40 let.
How long did it last?
Kako dolgo je to služenje trajalo pri Jeremiji?
I'm just checking you're listening.
40 years.
Good. And his ministry covered 5 kings,
Njegova služba za Boga je pokrila 5 kraljev,
and only one of them was good.
pa samo eden izmed teh 5 kraljev je bil dober.
And that was the first king called Josiah.
Prvi je bil Josija.
And after Josiah died, there followed 4 kings who were up to no good at all.
In ko je kralj Josija umrl, so sledili 4 kralji, ki sploh niso bili dobri.
And Jeremiah's ministry covered the period of those 4 kings.
In Jeremijevo služenje pokrije obdobje teh 4 kraljev.
Jeremiah lived in the land of Judah, not Israel.
Jeremija je živel v Judi, ne v Izraelu.
And that's because there was no one left in Israel.
To pa zato, ker v Izraelu ni ostal nihče.
You see, after David and Solomon,
Po Davidu in Salomonu
the land of Israel got divided into 2.
je Izrael se razdelil v 2 dela.
10 tribes in the north
10 plemen, oziroma 10 rodov na severu
and 2 tribes in the south.
in 2 rodova na jugu.
The north was called Israel
Sever se imenuje Izrael,
and the south was called Judah.
jug pa se imenuje Juda.
What was the north called?
Kako se imenuje sever
And the south,
in jug?
Judah. And to the north of Israel, there was a huge empire called Assyria.
In na severu je bil ogromen imperij, ki se je imenoval Asirijski
And
imperij.
many years before the time of Jeremiah,
In mnogo let pred Jeremijem
they invaded Israel
je Asirija napadla Izrael,
and plundered the land
uničila zemljo
and took the people captive.
in odpeljali so ljudstvo v ujetništvo.
And 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel
Torej 10 od 12 rodov Izraela
disappeared from history.
je izginilo iz zgodovine.
I don't know whether you knew that happened.
Ne vem, če ste vedeli, da se je to zgodilo.
They became known as the 10 missing tribes of Israel.
Postali so znani kot 10 manjkajočih oziroma pogrešanih rodov Izraela.
So from just before the time of Jeremiah,
Torej tik pred nastopom Jeremije
we hear nothing else
ne slišimo nič drugega
about those other 10 tribes.
o teh 10 rodovih.
They were scattered to the lands of the north.
Razkropljeni so bili po severnih deželah,
Well, the survivors were.
no, oziroma tisti, ki so
Many
preživeli.
died.
Mnogi so umrli.
But 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin,
Ampak dva rodova, Juda in Benjamin,
stayed in the south of their land,
sta ostala na jugu
and the
dežele
land was called Judah.
in ta dežela se je imenovala Juda.
It's good to know that the empire of Assyria met its downfall.
Dobro je vedeti, da je Asirija, da je imperij,
But only because it was conquered by Babylon.
ampak zato, ker so Asirijo napadli Babilonci.
And Babylon invaded Judah.
In nato je Babilon napadal Judo.
And Jeremiah is around at the time just before this invasion.
In Jeremija služi tik preden se ta invazija zgodi.
During the invasion.
Med samo invazijo.
And in the time where many of his people were taken to
In
captivity.
Jeremija služi tudi v času, ko so mnogi odpeljani v babilonsko ujetništvo.
There were a few other prophets around at the same time.
Okoli tega časa so tudi nekateri drugi preroki.
You'll have heard of them. Ezekiel,
Ezekiel,
Daniel,
Daniel,
Habakkuk,
Habakuk
and maybe Zephaniah.
in morda Sofonija.
And they all have books in the Bible.
Vse njihove knjige najdemo v Svetem pismu.
So Jeremiah wasn't the only prophet around at the time.
Jeremija torej v tem času ni edini prerok,
But he was based in Judah.
ampak on je živel v Judi.
And some of the other prophets were based in captivity in Babylon.
Nekateri preroki Jude pa so živeli v ujetništvu v Babilonu.
Jeremiah was about 20 years old or a little bit younger
Jeremija je bil okoli 20 ali morda malo mlajši,
when God called him to be a prophet.
ko ga je Bog poklical v preroštvo.
Who's nearest to 20 in the
Kdo je
room?
tu najbližje 20 letom?
Oh, how old are you? 21.
Boška je 21 stara.
Now imagine being 20 or just a few years younger,
Predstavljaj si, da si 20 ali samo malo manj.
and God tells you you're going to pilot a plane,
In Bog ti reče, pilotirala boš letalo
and this is your call on your life.
in to je tvoj klic na tvojem življenju.
Oh, hallelujah.
Aleluja.
You've got to tell everyone they're going to die,
Sam moraš povedati, da bodo umrli.
except the ones who are going to be captive in an enemy land.
Razen tistih, ki bodo ujetniki v sovražnikovi deželi.
How would you feel about that?
Kako se počutiš glede
I mean,
tega?
it's terrible.
Grozno.
It's not the prosperity gospel, is it?
To ni evangelij prosperitete.
You've got to be careful when you ask God to give you a call.
Moramo biti previdni, ko prosimo Boga, naj nam da klic.
Might not give you an expensive car,
Morda to ne bo drag avto,
a nice smart suit,
morda ti ne bo dal lepih oblačil
and send you on mission to Bermuda.
in morda te ne bo poslal na misijo v Bermudo.
That's not what happens.
To se ne zgodi.
Certainly to Jeremiah.
Še sploh ne Jeremiji.
So, shall we look at some of the structure of it?
Gledamo strukturo
Have you got your
Jeremije.
Bibles?
Če imate Sveta pisma,
Who's got paper Bibles and who's got electronic? Who's got paper Bibles?
kdo
Wave them
ima
at me.
Sveto pismo
Oh,
v knjigi in kdo ima elektronsko verzijo.
Good. Now I understand this is being recorded. Okay, because we're going to try and cover this. I've got to allow time for you to look into some things very quickly,
Bomo zelo hitri.
mainly for the sake of those on video or if you're taking notes.
Še posebno za
This
tega
is
videa.
how I've carved up Jeremiah.
Tako sem jaz razumel Jeremijo.
If you Google the book of Jeremiah,
Če boste obtipkali v brskalnik knjige
there
Jeremije,
are many other greater teachers than me
boste našli mnoge boljše učitelje od mene,
who carve up Jeremiah in different ways.
ki so Jeremijo pokrili na drugačen način, oziroma na različne načine.
But I found about 5 or 6 ways that I like to think about Jeremiah.
Jaz pa sem našel 5 ali 6 načinov, o katerih rad razmišljam pri Jeremiji.
Chapter 1 is all about his call.
Poglavje 1 je o Jeremijevem klicu.
It's one of the greatest introductions to a book in the Bible.
To je eden najlepših uvodov v knjigo v Svetem
In
pismu.
fact, some books in the Bible don't even have an introduction.
Nekatere knjige v Svetem pismu sploh nimajo uvoda v
They
knjigo.
just start and it's complicated.
Nekateri samo začnejo in je zakomplicirano.
But Jeremiah chapter 1 is a wonderful introduction.
Ampak Jeremija poglavje 1 je čudovit uvod.
And it tells you very simply the call on his life.
In na zelo preprost način poda klic nad njegovim življenjem.
And let me tell you, probably apart from Job,
Naj vam povem, razen Joba,
he's got the toughest job.
ima on najtežje delo.
He's not going to have an easy life.
Njegovo življenje ne bo enostavno.
And God tells him up front he's not going to have an easy life.
In Bog mu naravnost pove, ne boš imel lahkega življenja.
Here's 2 verses
Sta
from
dve vrstici,
Jeremiah chapter 1.
Jeremija 1.
Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth. Verse 9.
Se pravi 1:9. Potem je Gospod iztegnil svojo roko
And he said to me,
in se dotaknil mojih ust. Gospod mi je rekel,
now I have put my words in your mouth.
glej, svoje besede polagam tvoje usta.
See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms.
Glej, postavljam te ta dan nad narode in kraljestva.
Jeremiah is getting excited now.
Jeremija je zdaj navdušen.
But this is what God tells him he's going to say.
Potem pa tu pravi Bog.
You're going to uproot and tear down.
Da ruješ in podiraš.
You're going to destroy and overthrow.
Da uničuješ in rušiš.
And then you're going to build and plant.
Da zidaš in sadiš.
And that sums up the book of Jeremiah.
In tu je povzetek Jeremijeve knjige.
Most of it is bad news.
Po večini je to slaba novica.
You're going to uproot and tear down.
Ruješ in podiraš.
Destroy and overthrow.
Uničuješ in rušiš.
And then a bit of building and planting.
Potem pa boš malo zidal in malo sadil.
Anyone want a call from God on their life?
Ali kdo želi klic od Boga nad svojim življenjem?
In fact, we read that verse because if there's time, I want some of you to discuss what that means.
To vrstico smo prebrali, ker če bomo imeli čas, bi radi, da diskutiramo, kaj to pomeni.
For the call on your life.
Za klic nad tvojim življenjem.
You see, what that tells me very simply is this.
Zelo preprosto, to mi pove sledeče.
God's primary concern is never our happiness.
Božja prva skrb nikoli ni naša lastna sreča.
Should I say that again?
Naj to rečem še enkrat?
God's primary concern is never our happiness.
Božja primarna skrb nikoli ni naša sreča.
It's always his purposes.
Vedno je njegov namen.
So what does that mean when God calls us?
Kaj to pomeni, ko Bog pokliče nas?
Anyway, that's chapter 1. It's a wonderful introduction.
Ampak tukaj imamo prvo poglavje, to je čudovit uvod.
By the way, another introduction to the book, this is how mixed up it is,
Še en uvod v knjigo
is chapter 36.
je poglavje 36, tako zmedena je ta knjiga.
And it's just worth mentioning.
In je le ena beseda.
Because Jeremiah didn't write the book of Jeremiah.
Saj ni Jeremija ta, ki je napisal Jeremijevo knjigo.
He just dictated it.
On jo je samo diktiral oziroma navajal.
It was written by his assistant called Baruch.
To knjigo je napisal njegov pomočnik Baruch.
And in verse 4 of chapter 36,
Torej 36. poglavje vrstica 4.
We are like a fly on the wall looking at how Jeremiah was written.
Smo kot muha na steni in gledamo, kako je Jeremijeva knjiga napisana.
This is what it says in verse 4.
To pravi v 4. vrstici.
So Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Neriah.
Tedaj je Jeremija poklical Nerijajevega sina Baruha.
And while Jeremiah dictated all the words the Lord had spoken to him, Baruch wrote them on the scroll.
Baruh je po Jeremijevem nareku zapisal v zvitek knjige vse Gospodove besede, ki mu jih je govoril.
So we have this book with us today
Torej mi imamo to knjigo pred nami danes,
because Jeremiah had a helper.
ker je imel Jeremija pomočnika.
Who's your helper?
Kdo je tvoj pomočnik?
You see, if Jeremiah was on his own,
Če bi bil Jeremija sam zase,
I know we wouldn't have this book.
vem, da mi te knjige ne bi imeli danes.
I know that for a couple of reasons.
To vem iz nekaj razlogov.
Jeremiah was too busy to write it.
Jeremija je bil preveč zaposlen, da bi on lahko pisal.
And two, a king destroyed this first scroll.
In drugič, kralj je uničil prvi zvitek.
He wrote the scroll for a king,
Zvitek je zapisal za kralja
and the king took some scissors out
in Bog je vzel nekaj
and cut
škarje,
it up and threw it on the fire.
ga razrezal in je ta zvitek vrgel v ogenj.
And Baruch had to write it all again
In Baruh je moral vse to ponovno zapisati
and put it in order for us.
in zapise urediti, da bi jih mi lahko brali.
Without Baruch,
Brez Baruha
we wouldn't have the book.
mi ne bi imeli Jeremijeve knjige.
Who makes your ministry work?
Kdo pomaga tebi v tvoji službi za Boga?
Very rarely are we called to do ministry on our own.
Zelo redko smo poklicani, da sami opravljamo službo za Boga.
There's usually a helper,
Običajno imamo pomoč.
and they're usually just as important as us.
In naši pomočniki so običajno ravno tako pomembni kot mi sami.
And we forget that at our peril.
To pa velikokrat pozabimo.
Anyway, there we go. Just an aside.
Samo kot stranski pomnik.
Here's the next section of the book from chapter 2 to chapter 24.
Tu je naslednji del knjige od poglavja 2 do poglavja 24.
There are 22 chapters of Jeremiah warning Judah.
22 poglavij je, ko Jeremija opozarja ljudstvo.
And it's not a happy read.
In to ni srečno veselo branje.
You know, when I was studying management,
Ko sem študiral management,
they taught me something called the praise sandwich.
so mi povedali nekaj, kar se imenuje sandvič pohvale.
Have you heard of the praise sandwich, Chris?
Kris, si slišal za ta sandvič?
So when you want to give someone some bad news,
Ko hočeš nekomu dati neko slabo novico,
or you're doing their annual review,
ali pa greš čez letno poročilo z nekom
and the main thing you want to tell them is they're not doing very well,
in jim hočeš povedati, ne gre ti dobro,
then you structure your talk
potem svoj govor
like a sandwich.
Kot sandvič.
Bread,
Imaš kruh,
praise them,
jih pohvališ,
tell them something good.
poveš jim nekaj dobrega.
Bad news in the middle,
Slaba novica v sredini,
you're not working very well,
ne delaš dobro,
people tell me you're lazy.
ljudje pravijo, da si len.
Next bit, bread, praise,
In potem spet kruh, spet pohvala,
build them up.
izgradi jih.
But I know you can be a good employee,
Ampak vem, da si lahko dober
so
zaposlen.
let's do better this year.
Torej daj v letos bolje.
And I'm on your side.
Jaz sem na tvoji
Off you
strani.
go.
Pojdi.
It's called the praise sandwich.
Temu rečemo sandvič pohvale.
Jeremiah did not learn the praise sandwich.
Ampak Jeremija se tega sandviča ni naučil.
From chapter 2 to chapter 24,
Od poglavja 2 do poglavja 24
Jeremiah is just telling Judah how bad they are.
Jeremija ljudstvu govori samo, kako slabi so.
He's even telling them they do church badly.
Jeremija ljudi pove celo, da opravljajo cerkev slabo.
Imagine that.
Predstavljajte si
Shall we have a look? And you can discuss this later.
Lahko
Chapter
pogledamo
7.
In kasneje diskutiramo. Poglavje 7.
Chapter 7, verses 1 to 8. I'm going to ask Diana to read that. You just read it through. Chapter 7, verses 1 through 8.
Torej Jeremija 7, 1 do 8. Beseda, ki se je zgodila Jeremiju od Gospoda, rekoč: Postavi se k vratom Gospodove hiše, tam oznani to besedo in reci: Poslušajte Gospodovo besedo, vsi judovci, ki prihajate skozi ta vrata molit Gospoda. Tako govori Gospod nad vojskami, Izraelov Bog. Poboljšajte svoje poti in svoje dejanja, pa storim, da boste prebivali v tem kraju. Ne zanašajte se na vrljive besede, češ: Gospodov tempelj, Gospodov tempelj, Gospodov tempelj je to. Le če zares poboljšate svoje poti in svoje dejanja, če boste res pravično ravnali drug z drugim, če ne boste zatirali tujca, sirote in vdove, ne prelivali nedolžne krvi na tem kraju, ne hodili v svojo nesrečo za drugimi bogovi, tedaj storim, da boste prebivali v tem kraju, v deželi, ki sem jo dal vašim očetom od vekov in na veke. Glejte, zanašate se na vrljive besede, ki ne veljajo nič.
That's interesting, isn't it?
To je zanimivo, kaj ne?
You see, the people thought that the temple was the presence of God.
Ljudstvo je mislilo, da je prisotnost Boga v templju.
And they assumed that as long as the temple was there and was working,
In predpostavljali so, da dokler je tempelj tam in deluje,
that God was pleased with them.
je Bog z njimi zadovoljen.
That's what they assumed.
To so predvidevali.
Some people today assume that as long as they go to church on Sunday, God is pleased with them.
In nekateri ljudje danes mislijo, da dokler hodijo ob nedeljah v cerkev, je Bog z njimi zadovoljen.
That's a wrong assumption.
Ampak to je napačna predpostavka.
In the middle of it, did you hear what was said 3 times?
Na sredi je 3-krat rečena ena stvar.
It's a bit like someone saying, but this is my church.
Kot bi kdo rekel, pa to je
But
moja
this is
cerkev.
my church.
Ampak to je moja cerkev.
But this is my church.
Ampak to je moja cerkev.
And God says, I don't care.
Bog pa pravi, ni mi mar.
Are you treating people well?
Ali dobro ravnati z ljudmi?
Are you loving the right people?
Ali si ljubeč do pravih ljudi?
Do you care about the fatherless?
Ali ti je mar za sirote?
What about the widows?
Kaj pa vdove?
Get your ethics right.
Naj postavi svojo etiko na pravo mesto.
Get your morals right.
Uredi svoje moralne načela.
And if you don't,
Če pa ne,
I will destroy the temple.
bom uničil tempelj.
That's God saying that.
To pravi Bog.
I wonder if there are any lessons in that for us today.
Sprašujem se, če je tu kakšna lekcija za nas danes.
For some of us who assume that going to church
Za nekatere izmed nas, ki morda predpostavljamo, da to, da gremo v cerkev,
is all that's needed.
je vse, kar je potrebno.
Because that's clearly not right.
Kajti to zelo očitno ni prav.
We're called to be people who carry the values of God
Poklicani smo, da smo ljudje, ki
through our
nosijo
life.
vrednote Boga skozi naše življenje.
Okay, let's move on.
Ok, gremo naprej.
Chapter 25 will move over fast, but chapter 25
Na hitro bomo pogledali, ampak 25.
is
poglavje
where Jeremiah tells them, you're going to crash.
je čas, ko jim Bog pove, strmoglavili boste.
He says, Babylon's coming, they're going to take you captive for 70 years.
Pravi, Babilon prihaja, za 70 let greste v ujetništvo.
How many years?
Koliko let?
2 generations.
2 generaciji.
There must have been some old people here
Tu mora biti nekaj
who are
starih ljudi,
thinking, I'm going to die in captivity.
ki si mislijo, umrl bom v ujetništvu.
And is there anything I can do to stop it?
In a je kaj, kar lahko naredim, da to ustavim?
And Jeremiah says, no.
Jeremija pa pravi, ne.
It's going to take 70 years
70 let bo trajalo,
for God to work in you what he needs to work in you.
da Bog opravi delo v tebi, ki mora biti opravljeno.
Chapter 26 through to chapter 45
Poglavje 26 do 45
is Jeremiah telling Judah all about their judgment with a little bit of good news thrown
je,
in.
ko Jeremija judovcem govori o njihovi sodbi, zelo malo z dobre novicami.
Just a little bit of good news.
Samo malo dobre
But
novice.
most of it is about judgment.
Po večini pa je tu govora o sodbi.
He's telling them how tough it's going to be in captivity.
Jeremija jim pripoveduje, kako težko jim bo v ujetništvu.
Have you noticed that in the middle of that section
A ste opazili, da sredi tega odlomka dela
is a famous chapter, chapter 29?
je tudi zelo znano poglavje, poglavje 29.
Now I'm guessing
Predvidevam,
that most of you, or some of you,
da mnogi izmed vas, ali pa vsaj nekateri,
know a verse from Jeremiah 29.
poznate na pamet eno vrstico iz Jeremija 29.
Anyone want to have a go at saying it?
A bi jo kdo rad
Even
citiral?
in Slovenian.
Lahko je tudi
I
v
don't
slovenščini.
mind.
Jaz
Someone have a go.
Ali bi kdo citiral Jeremijo 29, znano vrstico?
Vem za načrte, ki jih imam z vami, govori Gospod. Za načrte blaginje, upanja, dobro prihodnosti in upanja.
Oh, I've just had it whispered in my ear. Brilliant. That's right.
Tako je, zelo dobro.
This is a verse that people have on posters.
To je vrstica, ki si jo ljudje dajo na plakate.
They'll have it on the front screen of their phones.
Imajo za ozadje na telefonu.
People will give it to each other and write it down and say, there's an encouragement, brother.
Ljudje bodo to vrstico zapisali in si jo dajali med seboj kot spodbudo.
But it's in the middle of a judgment passage.
Ampak to je sredi poglavje, ki govori o sodbi.
And that's one of the dangers of taking a verse
In tu je nevarnost, da vzamemo eno vrstico
and applying it to our life
in jo prenesemo na svoje življenje,
without understanding the context.
ne da bi razumeli, kakšno je ozadje in kakšen je kontekst.
Let's read just a little bit before that verse.
Preberimo samo malo pred to vrstico.
We're going to read verses 4 to 7. I'm just going to let Deanna read them. But remember this.
Torej, prebrali bomo vrstice 4 do 7, ampak zapomnite si tole.
These people are captives in a land they don't want to be in.
To ljudstvo je v ujetništvu v deželi, kjer nočejo biti.
They are being mistreated.
Slabo ravnajo z njimi,
They are oppressed.
zatirajo jih
Their hearts are longing to be back home.
in njihova srca hrepenijo po tem,
They
da
want
bi
to
bili
be
doma.
anywhere but where they are.
Radi bi bili kjerkoli drugje kot tam, kjer so.
And then God says this, verses 4 to 7.
Bog pravi tole, 29:4-7. Tako govori Gospod nad vojskami, Izraelov Bog, vsem izgnancem, ki sem jih dal odpeljati iz Jeruzalema v Babilon. Zidajte hiše in prebivajte v njih, zasajajte vrtove in uživajte njihov sad. Ženite se in rodite sinove in hčere, oženite sinove in pomnožite hčere, da bodo rodile sinove in hčere, da se boste tam množili in ne manjšali. Skrbite za blaginjo mesta, kamor sem vas izgnal, in molite zanj k Gospodu. Njegova blaginja je namreč vaša blaginja.
Wow. Look, it is a wonderful verse that God has plans for you.
To, da ima Bog načrte zate, je res čudovita vrstica.
But what if he has plans for you in a place you never wanted to be?
Kaj pa, če ima Bog načrte zate na kraju, kjer nikoli nisi hotel biti?
See, we think God has plans for me.
Mi mislimo, Bog ima načrte z mano.
And his plans must fall into line with my ambition.
In njegovi načrti morajo sovpadati z mojimi ambicijami.
But that is not what this verse is written into the context for.
Ampak to ni kontekst, v katerega je zapisana ta vrstica.
Where's a place you really wouldn't want to be right now?
Jana, kje je mesto, kjer res ne bi hotela biti zdaj?
V Iraku.
Iraq. Iraq. Okay.
Irak.
I've forgotten your name, my
Jana.
Jana. Okay. So Jana is taken captive and dropped in Iraq.
Torej, Jana je v ujetništvu in jo odložil v Iraku.
The city of Mosul.
Torej, v Mosulu.
And she is being oppressed.
In Jana je zatirana.
She can only buy products when she's told she can buy products.
Ona lahko kupuje samo, ko je to dovoljeno.
She does one thing out of line and she's beaten.
Ona želi samo...
Beaten.
No,
One thing wrong and she's beaten.
Aha, samo eno stvar naredi narobe in jo pretepejo.
It's a tough life.
To je težko življenje.
And God says to Jana,
In Bog pravi Jani,
hey, plan to be here,
moj načrt je, da si ti tukaj,
set up home,
tu si ustanovi dom,
get comfortable,
naj ti bo udobno,
pray for your oppressors,
moli za svoje zatiralce
work for the prosperity of Iraq,
in delaj za dobro Iraka.
because I know the plans I have for you.
Saj jaz vem za načrte, ki jih imam
Plans
s
not to
tabo.
harm you.
Načrte, da ti ne prinesem hudega.
See, that's the context of this verse.
In tu je kontekst te vrstice.
And I'd love you to chat about that.
In rad bi, da malo debatiramo o tem.
Okay, I'm running out of time. Let me tell you very quickly what happens next.
Zmanjkuje mi časa, naj hitro povem, kaj se zgodi potem.
Jeremiah does have one bit of good news.
Jeremija poda eno dobro novico, zelo malo.
One bit.
Samo en majhen delček.
And it's in chapter 31.
In to je v 31. poglavju.
And it's the one bit of good news that is repeated in the New Testament over and over and over again.
In to je en majhen del dobre novice, ki se v Novi zavezi vedno znova ponavlja.
And it's this: Jeremiah says to the people,
In Jeremija pravi ljudstvo.
God says he will no longer write the law on tablets,
Bog pravi, da postave ne bo več pisal na kamne,
but he will make a new covenant with
ampak
you.
naredil bo novo zavezo.
And the covenant will be written in your heart.
In ta zaveza bo zapisana v vaših srcih.
Now that's interesting.
To je zanimivo.
He is the first person in the whole Bible
Jeremija je prva oseba v celem Svetem pismu,
who ever uses the phrase new covenant.
ki kdaj uporabi izraz nova zaveza.
In the middle of all this bad news,
Sredi vseh teh slabih novic,
Jeremiah tells the people, God is going to make a new covenant.
Jeremija ljudstvo pravi, Bog bo naredil novo zavezo.
600 years later,
600 let kasneje,
Jesus gathered his friends
Jezus zbere svoje prijatelje,
and he broke bread
razlomi kruh
and he poured some wine.
in natoči vino.
He said, this is the blood of the new covenant.
In pravi, to je kri nove zaveze.
And he pinched the phrase from Jeremiah.
In vzame izraz iz Jeremije.
He didn't pinch it, it was his. He's God.
Ni ga ukradel, to je bil njegov izraz,
But it was the first time it was used since Jeremiah.
ampak takrat je bilo prvič, ko je ta
You're
izraz
here.
uporabljen po Jeremiji.
You're here because Jeremiah spoke about the new covenant.
In ti si tukaj zato, ker je Jeremija spregovoril o novi zavezi.
The book ends. Jeremiah was stoned to death in Egypt.
Knjiga se konča, Jeremija je bil kamenjan
Happy
v
ending.
Egiptu. Srečen konec.
Here's what's going to happen now. The video can stop because you're going to have 5 minutes of discussion.
Zdaj se video lahko ustavi, ker bomo imeli
Okay.
5 minut debate.